1901 had been a loud year. A queen died, ending an entire era. A president was assassinated, the American president. The new century had arrived anxiously and noisily. 1902 began differently. After the upheaval of the previous year, the world seemed to exhale. Newspapers wrote about politics, trade, and colonies. It felt like a year that would quietly roll to its conclusion. But on the morning of May 8th, the attention of the entire planet was suddenly fixed on a small island in the Caribbean Sea. Saint Pierre on Martinique was known as the Paris of the Caribbean. 28,000 residents, a stone theater, a botanical garden, a cathedral, electric lighting, a postcard city. High above the city stood Mount Pelée. For 50 years the volcano had been silent. In April 1902, it began to wake. Ash fell on the rooftops. The air smelled of sulfur. The ground shuddered. The local authorities were worried, but not about the volcano. Elections were 2 weeks away. They feared one thing: panic. If evacuation was ordered, people would flee, the vote would collapse, and Paris would be displeased. Everything is under control. Stay in the city. May 8th, 7:52 in the morning. Mount Pelée exploded. A pyroclastic flow, a superheated mixture of gas, ash, and rock at around 1,000 degrees, tore down the mountainside at 500 kilometers an hour. Within 2 minutes, Saint Pierre no longer existed. Nearly 30,000 people died faster than they could understand what was happening. In the city itself, only a handful survived. The most famous was Louis-Auguste Siperis, 27 years old, serving time for a stabbing. His cell was partly underground, with a single small barred opening. The flow scorched his back, but the thick stone walls held. For 4 days he screamed beneath the rubble until rescuers heard him. He later toured with Barnum's circus as the man who survived the end of the world. The prison that locked him up saved his life. The telegraph carried the news across the planet within hours. It was one of the first disasters the entire world learned about, almost in real time. Mont Pelée gave scientists the material to finally understand the nature of such eruptions, at a cost of 30,000 lives. The city the authorities had worked so hard to keep calm disappeared, along with the polling stations, the administration, and the governor himself. Obviously, the election did not take place. While the world was still talking about Martinique, something else was happening in Paris. Marie Sklodowska-Curie, 34 years old, was finishing work that had taken 4 years. Her laboratory didn't look like much: an old wooden shed, a leaking roof, freezing in winter, unbearable in summer. It was a shack. Curie was trying to prove that radium existed. Not on paper, not in theory. She needed to extract it with her own hands. The raw material was uranium ore from Bohemia. Ton after ton, crushed, dissolved in acid, boiled, filtered, boiled again. It looked less like science and more like metalwork. By the summer of 1902, all of that had produced 1/10 of a gram of pure radium chloride. It glowed in the dark, a soft bluish light. Pierre and Marie would come to the shed at night just to look at it. Nobody understood the danger. Pierre carried a vial of radium in his pocket. Sores appeared on his skin that took months to heal. He didn't connect the two. Marie's working notebooks are still radioactive. Researchers handle them in protective gear. They will remain radioactive for another 1,500 years. In 1903, she received the Nobel Prize in Physics. In 1911, a second in chemistry, the only woman in history with 2 Nobels. She died in 1934 from the effects of radiation exposure. Out of that shed would come X-ray diagnostics, radiation therapy, nuclear energy, and the atomic bomb. Humanity had looked inside matter for the first time and found a sun. That same summer brought another discovery. Unlike radium, it didn't need to be extracted from tons of ore. It had been sitting on a library shelf for 36 years. The author died in 1884. He never saw recognition. Gregor Mendel, an Augustinian monk from Brno. For 8 years he grew peas in the monastery garden and recorded how traits were passed on. Thousands of plants, tens of thousands of observations. He worked out the mathematical laws of heredity. He published in 1866. Nobody noticed. He wrote letters, argued his case. No response. He gave up on science, died in 1884, forgotten and completely right. In 1900, a Dutch botanist named Hugo de Vries was preparing to announce his discovery of the laws of heredity. Before publishing, he decided to check the literature. It had all been done before, 34 years earlier. It turned out 2 other scientists, Correns and Chermak, had reached the same conclusions at almost exactly the same time. All 3 acknowledged Mendel's priority. History had finally caught up with him. Also in 1902, Sutton and Boveri noticed something. The behavior of chromosomes during cell division followed Mendel's laws exactly. Hereditary information was stored in the chromosomes. This became the foundation of modern genetics. Curie had shown that inside the atom there was energy. Mendel, Sutton, and Boveri that inside the cell there was an instruction. One discovery would lead to the atomic age, the other to genetics and the mapping of the human genome. It took the world 36 years to open a book that had been sitting on the shelf the whole time. The monk who counted peas in a monastery garden had uncovered one of the fundamental laws of life on Earth. In the summer of 1902, the Sackett and Wilhelm's printing company in Brooklyn faced a problem they could not solve. The heat was unbearable. But worse than that, the humidity was ruining their work. Paper absorbed moisture from the air, expanded unpredictably, and refused to align properly on the press. Ink bled, colors blurred, Entire print runs had to be repeated. Losses were mounting. They called in a young engineer, 25-year-old Willis Carrier. Fans, ducts, coils, nothing glamorous. He observed a simple physical principle: humid air, cold surface. Moisture condenses. The air becomes drier, more stable. So he built a machine. A fan drew air through chilled coils. Water removed excess humidity. The temperature dropped. On July 17, 1902, the system was switched on. The ink stopped bleeding. The paper held its shape. He was not trying to change the world. He was solving a production problem for a single building. Air conditioning quietly redrew the map of human civilization. Carrier never became a household name. No newspapers announced that he had changed civilization. But every time a cool room shields you from summer heat, you are standing inside a system that began with a printing problem in Brooklyn. The ink stopped bleeding. The world changed without noticing. While Carrier was cooling the air in Brooklyn, in Paris, they were working on a harder problem: how to travel to the moon. On screen, Georges Méliès, 40 years old, a former conjurer and owner of a theater of illusions. When the Lumière brothers screened their first film, Méliès was in the audience. He understood immediately. This was not a way to record reality. It was a way to invent it. By 1902, he had made more than 400 short films, but no one had yet attempted 14 minutes, an epic by the standards of the time. 10,000 francs, Jules Verne meets H.G. Wells. A rocket, a cannon, the moon. Everything was shot in the studio. Glass roof, theatrical sets, trap doors in the floor. Selenites vanished in puffs of smoke. The rocket approached the moon through a simple trick: stop the camera, move the set closer, start again. Primitive. But in 1902, audiences left the theater in astonishment. This is the detail that matters. Then there was the color. Frame by frame, 250,000 in total. An army of women with fine brushes turning black and white film into color. It wasn't technology, it was obsession. Edison copied the film and released it across America. Méliès received nothing. 20 years later, he went bankrupt. He sold toys and sweets at Montparnasse station. His films gathered dust in a warehouse. Some were melted down and turned into shoe heels. When journalists finally tracked him down, he wasn't sure why they had come. Humanity did not yet know how to fly. The Wright brothers would take off the following year. The moon landing was 67 years away, but the imagination had already colonized space. A Trip to the Moon was the first science fiction film. The moment cinema stopped recording the world and started inventing it. A conjurer who wanted to fly and taught cinema how to make the impossible real. April, Milan. A hotel room, a piano, a gramophone horn, an enormous metal funnel, a recording agent waiting with wax cylinders. Enrico Caruso was 29, a Neapolitan from a poor family. By 1902, he was already singing at La Scala, Italy's greatest opera house, a rising star. He stepped up to the horn and sang. The aria was Vesti la Giubba from Leoncavallo's Pagliacci, the monologue of a clown who must make the audience laugh, knowing his heart is broken. Three and a half minutes, one side of a record, 78 revolutions per minute. If he moved even a step away from the horn, the recording lost volume. He stood motionless and sang louder than usual. The technology was primitive. The result was staggering. The record sold in the thousands, unheard of at the time. Caruso received not only a fee, but royalties, a percentage of every copy sold. The very idea that a voice could be reproduced and sold was new. 3.5 minutes, one side of a record. That was enough to make music stop being a moment. Now it could be bought, taken home, and placed on a shelf. A Neapolitan who stood in a hotel room in front of a tin horn and never disappeared. The important things tend to happen quietly. In a leaking shed, in a monastery garden, in a hotel room with a tin horn, something like that is probably happening right now, somewhere nearby.